Welcome to the 4F, 4Fs with Jeff.
Welcome back to the 4Fs podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Clough. Today's guest is my good friend, Gina Tesla. Gina is a tech executive, a global citizen, generally a deeply grounded person. She's lived and worked across continents and led purpose-driven initiatives at some of the world's biggest companies. In this episode, Gina shares stories that span from her childhood in upstate New York to her work in corporate social responsibility. We talk about the role of service, about navigating complexity, the importance of listening, really listening, and the role of it all in leadership. So settle in. Join me for a conversation with Gina Tesla. As always, if you find yourself with no more F's to give, I got you covered. So, Gina, thanks so much for joining today. It's great to see you. As always, every podcast begins with the same question, which is this. Tell me about yourself.
Well, it's so wonderful to see you. I'm so happy to see you. I really miss working with you. And I know we've kept in touch, but it's been mostly through text and things. So it's great to actually see you today. And I'm really honored to be part of your podcast. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I feel the same.
Yeah, it's so to catch you up. It's been a bit of a whirlwind. So the last time that we were working together, I was living outside of Seattle and we were together at Microsoft, of course. And I've moved back to the East Coast. So I'm back in New York and really happy to be back here. So it's been a lot of transition, but I'm soaking in every moment of being back in New York.
It feels right? I mean, like East Coast, that's you. Like, I'm guessing that in your mind, there's probably like not a lot of scenarios where you end up spending the rest of your time in the Pacific Northwest, right? I mean, the East Coast is where you want to be, I think.
Look, I think the Pacific Northwest is absolutely stunning.
Yes,
I mean,
no question.
Being in Woodinville, Washington on a sunny day, I mean, there is nothing better. And of course, we have very, very dear friends who are still there and some family up in Canada. So really, really felt lucky to spend time there. And I'm just one of those crazy people who actually prefer to live in New York.
No, I think, you and, there's several other million people, who like to live in that area. So you're not, I'm clearly not alone in that. So, I'm glad you made it back to the East Coast. So, okay. So now you grew up in that general area though. Is that right?
I grew up both in New York City and then in what some people would refer to as upstate New York, not too far upstate New York, but I grew up in two very different settings all at the same time. My family and I, we lived in New York. I was born in Queens and we lived in various parts of Queens. And then I lived in Manhattan. And then at one point, my mom and I moved up to Dutchess County, which was a very rural place at the time. And my father was in Queens. My parents split up. And so I spent a lot of time in Queens and I spent a lot of time in Dutchess County. So that's why I think the type of person who can, I'm a little bit of a chameleon and I can fit in happily in a lot of different settings.
That's interesting. Was that like a little bit of a skill set to kind of figure out how to navigate both of those worlds? This is the closest I have. I grew up in rural Idaho, and then when we moved to to the city that I live in, Salt Lake City, it was a big change. I grew up like we had kettles on where I lived before, and then when I moved to a somewhat urban environment, it was I stuck out so much. And those two things are not at all the same as living in Manhattan. Salt Lake City and Manhattan, they're not the same, right? So I mean, how did you navigate that transition? I mean, that's not easy as a kid.
Actually, I felt and feel most at home in I would say pretty much an urban setting, or where I am now. I'm in Westchester County, so I'm very, very close to New York City. I was just there today. It's really easy to get there, but I also, where I live, it's quite peaceful. And in terms of navigating it, I mean, it was very much night and day. And I think that, experiences that we have sometimes feel like, oh, this is a really difficult situation when it's happening. but it does build resilience. And then ultimately, I think has given me the sort of the beauty of being able to appreciate all different kinds of settings. So I love to go to, I'd be very happy to spend time in Arizona on a dude ranch or be in the middle of New York City or on a remote island. I mean, I kind of appreciate many, many different kinds of settings.
I like that. And I like what you said about, just like challenges and hard things. I was just literally having this conversation last night about how there's never been anything that's been really, I've never had a challenge that looking back on it, I can't be like, oh, that was so good. I learned so much from that. And, you can see the other thing that stinks when you're in the middle of it. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's, I'm glad you raised that. All right. So you lived around Manhattan, then moved to more rural New York, spent some
Yeah,
time going back and forth, and then you ended up going to college. Yeah. And
I
so how did
did.
you select your college?
That's a great question. And I've been reflecting on this a little bit. In fact, today, because I went down to a breakfast for Pace University, which is the school where I went for my bachelor's degree. But I was the first in my family to really complete college. And I didn't have the resources to go to university. And I do want to say, I mean, the value of education was very, very much instilled in me. But I really had to start at a community college level. And I have a lot of gratitude for the fact that that is an option for people. And so I actually started at Dutchess Community College, and I thought I was going to be a teacher ever since I was, in elementary school. I wanted to be a teacher. But I started taking business classes and I was doing really well in them and I liked them. Um, and so that became a really good opportunity for me to continue my education. I got a scholarship to Pace University. That's where I studied marketing and business administration, and that's where I got my bachelor's degree.
So was the decision to go to community college first, was that just because it was convenient or it was kind of like what you knew, or was it something else? Ask. I was reviewing I also started at a community college, but it was because that was the only college where I could be accepted. My GPA was just terrible before that. And, I, anyway, just curious.
I think it was just a matter of I kind of lived in this world where it was true that education was very much valued, but I also grew up in a generation where we were very much free range and we didn't really have a lot of guidance. I certainly didn't have any interaction with that I can remember of note with any sort of guidance counselor. I went to a relatively big high school and I kind of, I, you know, I had always done really well in school. And in my high school years, I think I was pretty much bored. Um, and very, very independent. And I just wasn't, I think I always knew that I was going to go to university, but I just didn't really have any guidance or really wasn't focused on how to apply or anything like that. And so I ended up going to Duchess. And I would say that it was really largely driven by finances. I mean, I didn't have any money to go to school. Um, and it provided that opportunity, which I went from going to Dutchess Community College, which, I think was an excellent education, to being a graduate of, the Cornell Johnson School of Business with my MBA. And so I think that having that kind of opportunity is which drove some other decisions that I made in life. So at one point, I decided to be a Peace Corps volunteer. And that was in part because I felt like as an American, I had an opportunity to do some of these things because I had a will. I didn't have meaning
Desire.
where it had a desire. Thank you.
Yes.
Um, I didn't have the resources, but I had the desire. And in my experience, I realized it's not the experience for all Americans. And I certainly appreciate that. But in my experience, I had that desire. And so I made it happen. And I think it's pretty amazing that, you can go from community college, which again is, I definitely, I'm grateful for every teacher and, every class that I've had all along the way have been excellent, but I never thought that I would go to an Ivy League school.
It's quite an accomplishment. So I was wondering if you could help, kind of bring together what happened between your time at Pace and then your time at Cornell. Like how did you get from Pace to Peace Corps to Cornell? Was there anything between those?
Sure. Well, Pace set me up so well because they really have a career-driven focus. And so I had an internship while I was majoring in marketing, and I had an internship at Young and Rubicam Advertising, which at the time is, one of the premier advertising agencies. And I was one out of 12 interns who was selected for a full-time role. And I started at Young and Rubicam, and I was just so lucky to be able to um, begin my career in advertising and media planning. I went to the Young and Rubicam Media School, and I learned a lot about client service, conflict resolution, negotiation. It was where, we had our social life. We would be there having so much fun. I mean, I made $20,000 a year and lived in the Upper West Side. So I shared a 1-bedroom apartment. I could basically only afford to eat peanut butter and jelly. However, I was going out to some of the best restaurants in New York or having amazing experiences all over the world. Um, and learning so much. So that's where I started working on technology accounts and global accounts. And so that was really important seed for me. And while I was doing that, I started to have this appreciation. When I grew up in Manhattan, Queens, Manhattan, the times that I grew up, I mean, there were a lot of visibly homeless people and a lot of poverty, crime. And so I just started to have an appreciation for the opportunities that I had. So I was referencing that before, being able to go to school. I was doing really well in advertising. And I just started thinking about the Peace Corps. I started thinking about what could I do to serve and give back. And I felt, patriotic. And I just, some people go in the Peace Corps, have parents who have served or uncles or things like that. And I didn't have anything like that, but I just started looking at it. And that's how, it was really a combination of I was working at Ogilvy and Mather on the IBM account. And I thought, oh, this is really great. But at some point, I'd like to be on the other side of the table. How am I going to get there? I want to get my MBA. If I'm going to get my MBA, I want to go to a top school. I also felt this desire to serve. And I decided to go into the Peace Corps. And I did that for 2 years in Panama. And then I came back and went directly from the Peace Corps to Cornell, to the Johnson School to get my MBA. So that's what happened in those years.
To make the transition, I want to go to business school and I want to go to a top school, which clearly you did. And so the Peace Corps was a part of a stepping stone to do that. And also it sounds like it solved that other problem for you, which I heard you say was not solved a problem, but it also met the, I don't know if this is the right word, but it met a need, so to speak, of, hey, I want to give back. I feel this desire to serve. That's really neat.
Yeah.
I can see that in you. This like root of, I can like just wanting to serve and help. Like that was a little bit of a reinvention. You've had an awesome career, not just then like, okay, you started your career there. It's awesome. You've had an awesome career and you're still in the middle of an awesome career. I counted through these. I counted at least 5 reinventions. So I got media planning, strategy, business development, global partner ops, and then finally it went up and mingled in there. And then currently corporate citizenship, where that seems like another place where you kind of felt at home, right? It seems like that's after pivot, like those are really different careers, 5 of them at least. And I guess I skipped over the Peace Corps. So there's a 6th career. So I think just anecdotally, I'm seeing a bunch of people, I mean, myself included, doing some reinvention. And so I'm curious if you have any thoughts on reinvention and what if you have any thoughts on what it takes to have a successful reinvention, especially now with
Sure.
the AI coming into play.
Exactly. And to start with the future, I do think that it's absolutely necessary to build skills that are transferable and to build a certain sort of character and mindset that's going to be flexible and adaptable, because kids who are in high school now or in university now, they're going to have jobs that don't even exist, that we can't even imagine. And they're going to have so many different careers. And so I think that it's absolutely essential to, as you're sort of building your career and building your life, you're learning more and more about yourself and your particular strengths, the things that you want to cultivate. And I think the through line to all of those different careers is really, I'm a very people centered person. And I do believe in service. I am very goal oriented. And I think, those are the things that are consistent. And so I've put myself in situations, or sometimes been thrust into situations where I've had to pivot. I've had to and wanted to really challenge myself. And I've tried to build upon each major sort of skill set that I've received from one career to another. And sometimes I can do a better job at that than others. But having, for example, a foundation in communications, I think is really important, because it's essential for almost every career in my view. And so that's certainly something that I'm very happy to have started with that. And it's something that I'm always working on. I'll never be finished with that. I think as I've grown in my career, I've also really loved and constantly are working on improving my strategic approach and sort of my strategic insights. So I love to really, I'm a builder. I love to build things. I love to build organizations. I love to build teams. I love to nurture teams. And so, I think that while some of my careers may seem like, oh, well, that's sort of like a disparate, that's going from one thing to the next. I think really it's much more consistent than it seems, because it's really about teams and partnerships and relationships and building strategies to succeed. So I think the most important thing is to be resilient and to be flexible and adaptable. And serving in the Peace Corps was something that certainly really gave me the ability to, in sometimes in a very painful way, to learn how to be much more resilient and flexible and adaptable.
I've never had that experience, but I've heard stories, and I can imagine I can imagine how that would be the case. So you talked about a bunch of all the key skills I heard you reference just now are all soft skills. So, I mean, clearly you have some hard skills as well, but it sounds,
Yes.
if I'm hearing you right, that soft skills those are really the ones that you see as valuable now and really valuable in your transitions through your career and your career growth. Is that, am I reading that right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think to be an effective leader, you really need to be someone who listens first, who has humility, who genuinely cares about people. And I'll say that in some settings, in some corporate settings, that's more appreciated than others, and that's fine. And I'm okay with that. Meaning that I, would prefer to live to my own true values, and if that's what's really important to me. And I think that, you know, teams really thrive in an environment where people can show up and be themselves, and where there's an environment of innovation, a appreciation of failure and using failure to learn and to further innovate. So, I mean, certainly there's a lot of quote, sort of hard skills in my portfolio, if you will, but I'm referencing, some of the people skills first, because I think that they are, they're really critical, and that's what people are going to remember about me, I hope.
I think that's accurate. And also for what it's worth, the more hard skills, I think you'll also be remembered for. So, yep. There's plenty to remember. So you mentioned failure, and I was going to go a different direction at the moment, but since you brought it up, I've been thinking a lot about failure and these lessons that we learn from it. It's cliche, but they say some things about failure. Failure is the greatest teacher, all of that, or my biggest failures are the most valuable. I've heard people say that. And I'm seeing some wisdom in that. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts on, lessons learned from failure or how you've approached it in the past.
Yeah. I mean, failure is painful. It's people want recognition. They want to succeed. They want to do the best job that they possibly can. And sometimes just along the way, things just don't work out. Maybe, that can be everything from thinking that you're doing something right. When I was living in the Peace Corps, I had the honor of living with an indigenous group of people, and whoa, I made all kinds of mistakes. Even though I was trying to learn about the culture, um, I made all kinds of mistakes. And it was through, those mistakes and having to give my rationale and, you know, explain what my motivation was that ultimately really brought me closer to the people who I was working with. I mean, that's one example, but that's one that's very near and dear to my heart because I really learned from those types of experiences. But it happens all of the time in the corporate setting as well. And I think that it's really in that kind of opportunity where, you can learn the most. And if you can create an environment where people feel like, okay, I'm going to do everything that I can to prepare and drive, success and make an impact. And if I know that, if it doesn't go 100% right, that I'm going to have support, that I'm working in the type of environment where that will be appreciated. So it's a really delicate balance. It's so much easier to talk about it now, but I can tell you that if I was in the midst of figuring out that I screwed up about something, it stings and it feels incredibly uncomfortable, but that's really where the growth is. And I
Yeah.
think, certainly we can see that some of the most successful organizations are ones that have a spirit of innovation through exploration and not feeling like you can't try new things. And so, um, I think it's also important as a parent um, to recognize that that's also an important part of childhood and for teenagers, and to kind of bring that into your personal life as well. Um, I had the distinct privilege and honor of living with um, the an indigenous group of people who are called the Kunas. They have been living in an archipelago in the Caribbean off of Panama um, for over 500 years. They've been practicing the same sort of major ways of living and cultural beliefs. And at the time I was living, they have 365 islands. I like to say one for every day, and they are. They're idyllic. They're exactly what you would imagine, with the most beautiful, Caribbean waters and palm trees and all of that. And where I was living at the time was the water was deep enough to receive cruise ship passengers. So, they would be out in the Caribbean and then they could take those little boats in. And the cruise ship kind of had their regular routes. And so I was able to see some of the folks who worked on the cruise ship, they kind of came consistently. And I noticed that people who were visiting, because I could hear what they were saying, they didn't know anything about the culture of the island. They didn't know the name. They didn't know anything about the people who lived there, the artwork that they were appreciating. The Kunas make absolutely beautiful textiles called molas. And so I started to speak with some of the cruise ship personnel, and about how we could work together and help educate, and then work with the community to create a sign and help, bring more cultural knowledge and understanding to the people who were enjoying the island. And what that meant was that they ultimately invited me on the cruise ship and they said, hey, why don't you come and, talk to us about that? And I was like, great, this is so successful. Like, I'm actually going to do something meaningful. So, when you go to the Peace Corps, I will say every single person has their own unique experience. However, it's common to kind of, you arrive and people are like, literally think you're an alien. They think you fell out of the sky. They don't know why you're there. You don't know why you're there. You don't know what you're doing. You can't speak the language. You don't know how to wash your clothes. You're hot, all of it. And so I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be such a big success. They're going to be so happy with me. And that was not the case at all. I broke a golden rule, which was that only the chiefs were allowed to go on the cruise ship. And they were really angry with me. And they, previously had kicked out the Peace Corps for 30 years. So So I'm thinking, so they called me to they have each island has their sort of centralized, it's not centralized. They have their hut that's in the center of the island, and that's where the chiefs are. So anyway, they called me in and I really had to explain what I was doing and why I broke this rule. And I had only learned the indigenous language with Spanish teachers, and I wasn't fluent in Spanish. And so I was still, learning the indigenous language. And my approach was to ensure that I wasn't kicked off the island, didn't get all of Peace Corps kicked out of the island. I had some really wonderful counterparts and people who I built relationships with. And, I went together to represent myself. Like they helped me represent myself and explain what I was doing. And I just tried to use some levity. Maybe not so surprisingly, as remote as the island was, they still, very much like followed the Yankees, and they knew I was from New York and all of this. And so I just kind of cracked some jokes about differences in families and how my brother was a Yankees fan and my father was a Mets fan and blah, blah, blah. And I kind of just wove that in and created some levity and I think sincerity in terms of what I was doing. And I ended up fine in the end. Not only that, but it gave me a path and an avenue to work with the central government in Panama City, and I ended up working for 2 years with them on tourism. So I was successful, but it was really painful, and it's just an example of how I didn't have any intentions to screw up, but it did, and and it ended up being, it was okay.
It's a really great story. Because most people don't have that intention. You're clearly you're volunteering essentially your time for 2 years. You're there to help, to serve, to do some good. Well intentioned, it could still go awry, and that's a really great story of turning an initial failure into a win, and really neat learnings. Thanks for telling that. This shows my lack of knowledge about the topic. But when you joined the Peace Corps, in this case, were you assigned?
Yeah.
Did you have like a directive or
Yeah. Well, I love talking about the Peace Corps, and Peace Corps has 3 different goals for Peace Corps volunteers. And the third goal is to continue, like it's a lifelong goal and mission for me to talk about the Peace Corps.
Cool.
And to, sort of further advance understanding of the people who I served. And so I'm always really happy to talk about it. But yeah, so this was a while back and things have changed a little bit, but it's largely the same, which is that, first of all, Peace Corps only goes where they're invited. And the idea is that if a country would like us to come, they invite us. And there are different areas of support that we can give, whether that might be education or support with agriculture, business, and many other areas, medical. And so, so my area was community economic development because I had this business degree. I had worked in advertising for a number of years. And so you do get a description of what you're doing, but I will tell you that most Peace Corps volunteers don't end up doing anything probably close to what the description was. there's a lot of elements that are lost in translation, and it's really about discovery. It's really about, you know, if you go there with a thought that you are going to solve anybody's problem, or you're going to kind of like, push your way in there and fix everything, then you're absolutely will fail. And that's the same thing with corporations. That's the same thing with client service. I've spent time in consulting. I've spent time, most of my career, I've been working with clients in one way or the other, whether it's internal or external. And if you show up at a meeting with all the answers and you don't listen at all, then you're going to fall flat on your face. And so that, I think, was consistent, whether I was a Peace Corps volunteer or working in a corporate setting. So, so you do have an objective, but really it's for the individual with the community to figure out, what is it that you might be able to do together? How is it that you can help them with something that they want? It's not for you to do. It's for, you to figure out together with the community and try to, serve in the way that they would like you to. With all of that said, I will make a plug. There is something that's called Peace Corps Response, and that's where where people, Americans, can serve for shorter periods of time. So 6 months, 8 months, something, 9 months, with a very specific mission. And that can be really good for people who might be, mid-career or later on in their careers, and they want to apply, a really specific set of skills. But
That's
largely,
neat.
it's really about figuring out what the community really would like from you. And I will tell you, 9 times out of 10, they have no idea. So you have to figure it out together.
It's cool. I mean, I'm seeing so many common threads here, just so far as we're talking. I mean, about your desire to serve and, an opportunity. You mentioned how you initially wanted to be a teacher, and you end up in a scenario where you're able to educate and be educated. And that's, anyway, thanks for going down, going down that a couple of clicks deep.
Anytime.
Really interesting. Okay. So, all right. So now you finish Peace Corps, you go to business school, and you leave business schools. How did you end up after business school? How did you end up making, like, what happens between business school and landing in corporate social responsibility, environmental sustainability?
Yeah. Well, first of all, for anybody who may be thinking, what the heck is that?
Thanks. I was thinking
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. It can mean different things at different places, but essentially the way I like to think about it is that corporations have a very important role to play in society. And that is the societies where they're operating, societies around the world. And corporations have unique abilities and resources that they can lend to a whole host of societal needs, whether we're talking about everything from the environment and climate, or we're talking about healthcare, education. Every corporation has something to offer, whether it's through employees and their volunteerism. So corporations can create ways for employees to spend time volunteering, and that can be something that people are doing in sort of a one-off way. So that might be going and helping with a food bank for a day, or it can be something much more strategic where companies are essentially donating, a month, 6 months, a year of an employee's time and their expertise to particular issues. And philanthropy is also a part of that. Corporations might have foundations, corporations may want to contribute financially to any range of different community-based initiatives. So so I went to the Peace Corps, and then I had I felt like every sort of cliche about the Peace Corps rang true for me. So it was the toughest job I'll ever love. And the culture shock, I had a lot of culture shock when I went, and then I had a lot of culture shock when I came back. Uh, so it was definitely looking at my country in just with a different set of lenses. And so after that experience, I knew that I wanted to primarily work. My real goals were to work for a company whose values I shared. and where I would have the opportunity for career growth. And at that time, IBM was what made the most sense for me. And I really focused on starting my career at that point at IBM. And so I started in IBM's consulting practice. And it was a terrific opportunity because I was an internal strategy and change consultant. And I had the opportunity to work with senior executives across IBM. At the time, IBM had 400,000 employees and operated in 170 countries around the world. So I learned so much. And that's sort of going back to the earlier part of our conversation, understanding consulting, understanding, frameworks, understanding how to approach, which may seem like, how do I even get started with this problem solving? Well, when you have a consulting mindset, you can really understand, like, here's how you get started and here's how you sort of frame different challenges. So, so I did that at IBM, and I've also worked as a business development executive. But IBM also had a terrific legacy of corporate responsibility. And at the time, it was really, really difficult to get into. They had a very specific group that was engaged in this. And roles were very few and far between. And one came up and it was super competitive. And I didn't get the job at first, but I ultimately did get the job. And then that's when I started working in corporate responsibility. And I did that at IBM for 10 years until I moved to the West Coast.
You didn't start corporate responsibility and then kind of do the same thing for 10 years. I mean, you moved pretty darn quickly through the rank.
Yes.
I think it's quite an impressive trajectory. Was there kind of the same pattern that you described before being applied here, or what? If you can just, I guess, talk us through a little bit about your 10 years.
First of all, I will say it was absolutely one of the best sets of jobs, because I had many different jobs within that group that I had. But it was very risky for me to go into that. I was told that, from people who, not within that team, but people outside the team who tell me, oh, your career is going to stall and you'll never get anywhere. I also had some really excellent advice from people who said, and in this case, this was somebody within HR, and they said, look, can you imagine what this company or any company would be like if everybody was getting up and doing their dream job every day? And so I had, resistance, and then I had support, but I took a bit of a risk, and I flagged that because I think that it's really important for people to strive to do something that you love, something that drives purpose for you. And that's where you're really going to succeed. And so I was successful over those 10 years because I was able to apply a lot of the skills that I had built through many different experiences. So working on global teams, working for a variety of tech companies, building relationships, being in difficult situations, public speaking, on and on and on. And so, over the course of 10 years, I had the greatest opportunities and pleasure to work on many different things. But one thing that I will flag is that one of my coworkers who was at Cornell he was a year ahead of me, he came up with the concept for the Corporate Service Corps, which was a corporate version of the Peace Corps. And he had also been a Peace Corps volunteer. And the leadership, we had fantastic leadership of our corporate citizenship group. And we had, so to this day, one of my mentors, who I'm so grateful for, Stan Littau, was the head of the organization and really he had great relationships with three CEOs over this time. And we, really were able to build programming that delivered value for the company, but also delivered value for the communities. And so with the Corporate Service Corps, we took IBM's top employees and we put them together on teams of 10. They went through a competitive application process, and then we put them together on teams, sent them all over the world. They didn't know what they were going to be doing. They were all top performers, smashed them together, sent them off, and kind of had a mini version of the Peace Corps. And it was really great. We delivered a tremendous amount of value, very quantifiable, measurable value for the company, for the employees, and for the community. And so over the course of my tenure, we had 4,000 employees who went out on 1,500 assignments. in 40 countries around the world. And those people were from 60 countries around the world. And they, in 99.999% went off without a hitch, which is pretty incredible when you're talking about sending people from all over the world. And the way that happened was I, had an excellent team and just am very, very grateful to have such a wonderful team and opportunity to work on a program like that.
It's amazing. I mean, that's a significant impact to have these. I'm going to call them micro projects, although I don't like that word because
Yeah.
I can tell that they're a significant impact. But I mean, that's a really global span and a really significant impact in a lot of lives around the world. Wow, that's
Yeah.
so that's wow. So so essentially, you were able to go out and have this impact with all these people over the course of several years. So you had a similar impact to, like you said, the Peace Corps, mini Peace Corps, but with the structure and the support of a 400,000 person company and all the resources that go with it. That's amazing. Wow, that's a neat accomplishment.
Yeah, absolutely. And we worked with a lot of different companies who adopted the same programs and modified them for their companies, and it continues to this day. I serve on the board of a nonprofit called Common Impact, which is one of the NGOs out there in the world who are helping to facilitate this type of work. So it continues. And I would
That's a
encourage people, like, whether you can volunteer in your community, your company, or companies who want to start programs like this, I would encourage them to do that.
That's neat. I mean, I think it's a good plug too, because there's opportunities around. You can do it in your community. You don't have to work at a large company, or you can get involved. There are always grassroots efforts of folks, of ways that folks can get involved. So you mentioned your nonprofit board
Yeah.
service. Is that I guess I have two-part question here. One is, can you tell us a little bit about Common Impact? And then two, if people do decide, hey, I want to do some grassroots type of work, do you have any recommendations with Common Impact or otherwise where people
Yeah.
can, sometimes it's just hard to find an idea or a place to get started, I feel like.
Absolutely. And, for anybody who's listening, it doesn't have to, you don't have to be working in a corporation to volunteer. And I will, I really want to underscore that everybody has so much to offer to their communities, whether it's something that's strategic in nature or going out for, a day of cleanup in your local park. Studies have really shown that it really raises like your dopamine levels, and it's just a wonderful way to spend a little bit of time. So depending on where you live, you may keep an eye out for activities that are open in your community, or you can go and and I can send this to you. So maybe we can add some links,
Yeah.
but you can go to websites and you can look up volunteer activities in your community. So through things like the United Way as one example, and you can find local activities. And then you can also keep an eye out for notable times throughout the year, like Giving Tuesday, which is the Tuesday after Thanksgiving, where there's a lot of activities around either donating your time or your money. But I would encourage people to, to think about doing that multiple times a year. So Common Impact is a nonprofit that really helps facilitate volunteerism for companies. And so Common Impact and our wonderful staff really help cultivate these projects for corporations, whether it's something that a corporation only has time for a team to maybe spend a few hours or a day or several days on a project. And that can be virtual, it can be in person, and they're really the conduit between the company and the community organization that's receiving the volunteerism. So there's Common Impact, there's organizations like Pixar Global, Taproot, Points of Light, lots of different organizations that can help companies really develop volunteer activities that are going to be productive for the people who are receiving it. Because the last thing you want to do is go and waste the time of the organization that you're serving. I know some people had the chance to go and do things like, bake bread, but that wasn't the case for us. I mean, we were busier during COVID. And when you are, you're working really intensely and you're working really long hours, I think that it's important to uh, take the opportunity once in a while to step away and engage in this type of activity. And when you come back, you're going to be a better employee. You're going to think a little bit clearer. Or if, this can also, you don't have to be working in a corporation to receive the benefits of volunteerism. It's whatever you're doing in life. I mean, it's just a good way to kind of get out of your head. In some cases, if you have the ability and the opportunity to go out and get moving, or you can also do remote volunteerism opportunities right from your desk.
Yeah, that's I have two thoughts. I like how you talked about how it raises dopamine levels, and uh, you know, it's strange and counterintuitive. I think that if you focus on someone else, that you get happier. But I
Yeah.
also fully believe it. I mean, I've seen it true in my own life as well. What are your thoughts on board service as it relates to
Hmm.
and volunteer work as it relates to career progression?
Yeah.
Has that been impactful?
Yeah,
Relationships you build.
absolutely. I have learned so much from board service. Serving on a board has given me the opportunity to look at an organization from a completely holistic point of view. I've had opportunities and served in many different leadership roles where working in sustainability, I mean, you are really looking across the company, but you're doing that really focused on one set of responsibilities, let's say. Whereas for board service, you are looking at everything. I mean, you're looking at the finances of the organization, you're having conversations about the staff, you're looking for, business development opportunities, you're working alongside people who may have been on the board for 20 years, extremely experienced individuals, or people who might be earlier in their careers. And, you're working alongside ideally a diverse set of people with different kinds of backgrounds and experiences, professional experiences to contribute. So I highly recommend it. You do have to be committed in terms of the time. It's a time commitment, but I think it's very much well worth it. And if you have the time to make the commitment, and it also, it takes time to get on a board. And so if that's a goal that you might have, my suggestion is to, map it out and think about how, what your plan might be to get on a board.
That's a really good point. The having a plan and approach to getting on a board so that you can, ultimately accomplish that goal. How did you go about finding common impact and landing on that?
Yeah.
Even if you want to use a different one, some other experience. I'm just curious if how that happened for you, or if you haven't, if you're, I'm thinking, here's what I'm thinking. If I'm sitting here listening to this
Yeah.
podcast and someone thinks, gosh, I want to serve on a board, but I don't really know where to start.
Sure.
You start with your network or anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different ways to do it. So, number one, absolutely with your network. And I think it's important to have exploratory conversations. So, I would look for people in your network who do serve on boards and ask them for some time and ask them what, their experience is like serving on a board, and put it out there to say, hey, this is something that I think I might want to do. Would you keep me in mind? And so, having those kind of conversations, I think, is important. If you work for a company, there are, when I was at IBM, I was also responsible for another initiative, which was all around board service. So we were taking leaders and matching them to different board service opportunities. And if your company has that type of option for you, then that's great. Then you want to raise your hand and say, okay, I'd love to be considered for something like this. And then there are, very specific nonprofit services that will work with companies to help place people on boards and also prepare them. And, I would be remiss if I didn't note that serving on a board, I mean, you do have certain legal obligations and responsibilities for that organization. So it's not something to take really lightly. It is something where you want to make sure that you're doing it at a time where, you can make that type of commitment. But I don't want to scare people away because um, I think it's been, just a tremendous opportunity.
That's a very practical approach. That makes
Yeah.
perfect sense. I like that. I like it a lot. Okay. So we, we've talked through a bunch of a good amount of things, but I think the place from your career, we're following your career timeline through where we last said was you talked about how you then went to the Pacific Northwest. So you leave the East Coast for a little while, you go to Pacific Northwest, and you're working for Microsoft now. Is that
Yeah.
right? Okay. So talk us through from Microsoft and then to your, wherever you want to take it from, because this is obviously the most important chapter because this is where we met. And so from your time at Microsoft, then to your time back into corporate social responsibility.
Yeah. So, had the chance to make another transition at Microsoft. I was given the opportunity to come and work in a role that was new to me, that was really focused on supplier management. And it was a terrific chance for me to show that, this leadership skills that I had gained through my previous role, which was the 10 years of corporate responsibility, corporate social responsibility, were really transferable to the leadership role that I had working at Microsoft in Microsoft Consulting Services, and where I had the pleasure of meeting you and the rest of the team. And Microsoft was amazing. Uh, to be able to work with such gifted, smart, dedicated people. And we were part of a global team, which I absolutely loved. Remember, we worked with people who had been at Microsoft for, 2 years to 35 years, who had worked in many different capacities at Microsoft. And Microsoft was a place where, you and I really together had the opportunity to innovate. You were really the one who was providing all of the ideas and making it all happen. I just had the pleasure of supporting that in one way. But Microsoft's a fantastic company because if you have a good idea or you see an opportunity, then if you make a good business case, you can try it out. And so I had the opportunity to work with a different set of people at Microsoft, building out a Microsoft sustainability business offering, if you will, for Microsoft Consulting Services. And so it was an opportunity to transfer my skills to a different role, but to also begin to build another business opportunity for Microsoft. And then how can we talk about this? And we can't leave out the fact that we went through the pandemic.
Yeah.
And that was, my gosh, I started off working for Microsoft, driving to an office, and very short, I started in November of 2021, and by March, we were all home.
Yeah.
So, and then the bulk of my time at Microsoft, we were going through COVID and working remotely. And I think I even had COVID in January when we were all together before we even knew what it
Yeah.
was.
Yeah. I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was
What a
it was a
time.
whirlwind. It was a
Yeah.
whirlwind for sure.
Yeah. So you take a break from corporate responsibility and then,
Yes.
it feels like it's like this magnet, it's just pulling you back. Like
Yeah.
you clearly were involved. Like it's like this, it feels like it's just magnets. It's always tugging at you because even when you're at Microsoft, you're like, we have to do this. And then you get back into it full time. And if you can tell us about your time. This was the move to
Yes.
Coupa. Yes.
That's right. Yes. I was at Microsoft, and a company called Coupa Software came knocking on my door and said, "Hey, we've got some foundation here of ESG, which is an acronym for environmental social governance." They saw that there was a big uptick from the investors. They were a public company at the time, and that investors were really um, uh, keen to understand what their practices were to support, environmental, social, and governance initiatives. And the leadership wanted to advance it. They had someone who was doing a terrific job, who had really started with the some of the foundational building blocks, and they wanted to grow the team. I had that opportunity. I had the opportunity to build a team, and few months in, they asked me to also start their initiatives around diversity and inclusion. So I did that as well and had an absolutely amazing time. I had really, really strong support from, my supporting manager, who was a general counsel, chief legal officer. I had tremendous amount of support from him, the CEO, the leadership team, and the board. So we were able to start all kinds of new initiatives, including strategic volunteerism, which I referenced before.
Cool.
Yeah, so it was a terrific opportunity. Coupa was purchased by a private equity firm called Thoma Bravo, and that did transition the focus. And I had, an unexpected opportunity to work with them and some of their other portfolio companies to help coach them in starting some of their own ESG initiatives. So I had never worked for a company that small. I had worked for these ginormous tech enterprises because even when I was at IBM or at Microsoft, I was working, with clients who were huge. So most of my experience was with very, very large, well-established multinationals. And Coupa was in a very, very high growth, fast-paced phase. And it was a great learning experience to see, what that environment was and to be able to run really fast.
We've talked about how you made a bunch of transitions over the year, career transformations over the years. That was probably one of its own. I mean, you were in a field that you were familiar with, you had expertise in, but adjusting to startup life, that was probably, I should ask instead of assume, was that, tell us about that change. You said starting to run, I think is the word you used.
Yeah. And, when I was sort of in the dating phase with Coupa, I think that mutually we were wondering, would I be able to fit in? Here I had worked for these mammoth tech companies. And one thing, I appreciate the question because it's prompting me to mention something I haven't talked about yet, which is that at IBM, we were very entrepreneurial and that we were successful because we were quite innovative and because we moved a lot faster. And so on the face of it, it would have seemed like, oh, wow, this is going to be a huge difference. And, in some ways it was. But because I had worked on these teams that were relatively small but drove significant impact in terms of business value, uh, expanding into growth markets, providing leadership opportunities and expertise for employees. Because we were driving a lot of value, we were able to, engage in we were able to continue to have funding for things like corporate social responsibility programs. But the through line is that they were very small, entrepreneurial teams. And so having that type of experience was perfect for a company the size of Coupa because I had the background and the expertise to know, what sort of building blocks I needed to bring in. And I had an established network. I had established relationships that I was able to tap into for Coupa. And I wasn't afraid to go in and work in a very fast-paced environment because I had experienced, those pockets of that at the other companies.
That makes a lot of sense. And knowing you also, knowing your passion for this topic and how you want to make change, it probably was really nice to be able to just jump in, something familiar, and really make a change and drive some impact quickly. Do you have any of those? Is there any of that impact that or specific projects or things that you worked on? You gave a really good macro review of it, but anything specifically that you want to tell us about a little bit more, or I'm not
Yeah.
talking specifically, but yeah.
One of the initiatives that we started at Coupa was focused on, we called it the Equal Air Initiative. And this was an initiative where we were really focused on looking at air quality and how dramatically the quality of air really differs from community to community. So within one city, you can see vast differences in air quality because you may have, a part of the city, let's say, that doesn't have as many trees, or you might have communities who are living closer to distribution networks. So there might be tons of trucks or tons of airplanes, transportation that's happening within those communities. And so their rates of asthma, for example, are much higher. Um, and it just decreases their quality of life. And that can be, you can be living in a tale of two different cities in part, because of the quality of the air or lack thereof.
Yeah, good
And so
point.
that was an initiative, yeah, that we started. And one of the important things about that I really wanted to bring to Coupa was that it was an example of how, there's no one company, there's no one actor that's going to solve that kind of problem. It has to be through a collaboration. And so we built out what was called, a collaborative with an organization called Nation Swell. And the point of that was to really spread the word about the initiative and to bring other corporations or nonprofits or government entities into the effort. So that's something that, I thank you for asking because I'm happy to have the chance to highlight that we really wove that kind of thinking into our overall strategy, whether it was through the climate strategy that we built or how we were using some of our employee volunteerism time, some of our own corporate contributions. And yeah, so that's one example.
That's really impactful. I like this. You talked about how no one organization is going to solve for all these
Yeah,
problems. In fact, there's no one organization can't even be aware of all these problems.
right.
You need a detailed, an expanded community to be able to make yourself aware. This idea of air equality, essentially air qual.
Yeah.
Was that the right? Is that what you
Inequality.
call air? Yeah, air inequality. Thank you. I mean, that's super interesting because yeah, it's going to make going to make a big difference in your actual quality of life, depending on where you happen to
Yeah.
be within a specific environment. You might be in the same city, but if you're closer to some sort of industry, it can really have an impact on your quality of life. That's a fascinating thing. It's something I'd never thought of, but anyway, thanks for bringing it up. So
And what COVID also showed us, we saw pictures, for example, you could see the Taj Mahal very clearly, right?
yeah,
Because the world was at a standstill and we saw, you know, how that really changed the air quality for the better at that time.
yeah, it's a really good point. So I'm curious, as you're going through this process of, okay, there's this thing, there's a need and an opportunity or lots of opportunities, and we can help have an impact here. But corporations have this responsibility, a fiduciary responsibility, right? To
Yeah.
to their shareholders. How do you go about enticing or encouraging, or I mean, yeah, I guess how do you go about that? Going to talk to another company as you expand your partnership and then within your own company to get them to invest in this.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's like any other business conversation that you would have. The most important thing is to do your research and understand what is, so whether you're building a partnership or whether you are advocating for funding within the company for an initiative, you've got to understand what the strategic imperatives are of the organization. What is it that they're trying to accomplish? And how is what you're bringing forth going to help them meet their objectives? Again, whether that's within the company, whether you're trying to build a partnership with the government, with a nonprofit, with a school, it's really important to understand what their perspective is. And how do you do that? You do your research, you ask questions, you do a lot of listening, and you can then craft, um, you know, opportunities to help make a dent in those types of, let's say, societal issues that you might be working on, while also bringing value to that entity. So if, you have an organization, let's say you have new technology that's really showcasing how you might be able to make an advancement in communications or an advancement in healthcare, right? You can craft programs and initiatives and ways to contribute that kind of expertise. And you can do that, you know, in a philanthropic way while also building more awareness of the technology that you have to offer, for one example. You can also look at it from a risk mitigation perspective. When we talk about climate, I might be approaching it because I fundamentally want, it's part of who I am. And I care very much about the environment and doing whatever I can to minimize our impact on the earth. Well, okay, that's my agenda. But if I'm looking at it from someone who, has to really look at the bottom line, then I look at it as a risk mitigation strategy. If you're running a business and you're running it in any geography at this point, you have to understand what the potential, climate risks may be. So you have to do a climate risk scenario analysis. And so, that's another way to approach it. Or if you are, even if you're a public company or you're a private company that may go public, it may IPO, you have to set up that company so that investors are, you don't want anything to get in the way of investors' comfort level with the company. Or more positively, you want investors to feel like, yeah, I'm going to invest in this company because they are ensuring that they're avoiding, as much risk as possible. And that, they're more positively that they're building a brand image, that they're working with communities. At IBM, we would go into countries where we had maybe 6 people in that country, and we would work with the local ministry and understand what are some of your needs as it relates to the environment or education. And so we would work at the Ministry of Education, and then we would bring skills and capabilities that met the needs of that Ministry of Education for their communities. So, there's a lot of different ways that you can add measurable, quantifiable value to a corporation and to the shareholders through this type of work. And those are just, that is just scratching the surface in terms of the benefits that you can bring. And it's something where it's timely, it's evolving, and so it's adaptable. As we live in changing times, you can take these types of initiatives and you can kind of craft them to what's most applicable for that company, depending on what might be happening in the world or in their world at that time.
There's a lot in that, and I heard a couple of things that stand out to me. One is that corporate responsibility and responsibility to shareholders, those two things are not mutually exclusive, that you can align them. And I heard a lot of what you're saying about how to help them align, or how to align that is in different scenarios, going back to those soft skills, basically, listening and understanding and hearing what a company is trying to do, and then being able to then apply those other skills that you talked about, quantitative measures to be able to help them measure their success as well. Anyway, I remember this, that as I remember thinking about this, that as we learn about corporate responsibility, in my academic training in business school, that it was often talked about as a cost center, and it can be, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. That you can still achieve your goals as a company. Yeah,
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks. Okay. Well, before we jump to, I have kind of a couple of final questions about something that you mentioned a minute ago that stood out to me, was about your mentor. I think Stan Littell, I wrote down. Did I get the name right? Okay. So Stan, when you mentioned Stan, I could tell that there's a strong degree of respect and appreciation for this person. And I just been thinking about the importance of a good mentor. How did you find a good mentor? And do you have any, just your thoughts in general on what a good mentor does, how you went about identifying a good mentor, and then what, a little bit about what that looks like for you?
Yeah. There have been so many people who to this day continue to be supportive of my career. And I hope, I hope I have been able to be supportive of people along the way as well. And it is just absolutely vital. And it goes back to what I started with. It's all about people. And, we're really not, you're not in this alone. And it's really important to have people who can support you in a multitude of ways. And so there might be someone who is a great person, they're highly networked and connected, and they might be a great person for, you want to be judicious, but you may need that person to pick up the phone and speak on your behalf. So that's a great person. Or you may have another person for whom, you could, let's say, we talked about failure. Let's say, oh my gosh, like something happened and didn't go the way you wanted. You might have another that might not be the same person who can advocate for you. That might be someone who's just a really good listener, or someone who can help walk you through sort of what your approach might be to a situation. I also believe that it's really important to have people who are at various stages of their life experience or career experience. And so, that would mean for someone like me, it would be really important to have reverse mentoring, to have people in my life who are much younger, who can help me understand a little bit, just bring a different perspective to my professional life, let's say, and in return, help guide that person in some of their um, career progression. So, how do you find a mentor? I think that first of all, vulnerability is something that's uncomfortable, but something that I do think will get you places. And so if you can kind of, if you see someone who you admire, you can ask them for a few minutes of their time. You may say, hey, can I just have an informational interview? I just would like to learn more about your career. Do you have 10 minutes? And you want to honor that time that you've asked for. You want to be curious, come with questions. And then ask them, say, hey, would you be comfortable if we met, if I could reach out to you, if we might meet once a quarter or whatever it might be, whatever might be applicable. And then, there are lots of different affinity groups. So I also, over time, I have led a number of different organizations that have been focused on the advancement of women, and I currently co-chair the PACE Women's Network as one example. There are, you can go to affinity groups, whether that's through your university, if you're in a corporation or the organization that you might be working for, you see how you might be able to get a mentor that way. And then I've also built out programs where we've been even more structured, where we've had, like very specific matchmaking between mentors and mentees. But I think the most important thing is to, you got to be a little vulnerable. You got to put yourself out there. And I think that people by and large are very appreciative when you come and ask them, hey, I think, you're someone who I admire. I'd like to get your advice. And I think even people for whom you think they're incredibly busy, and they are, so they're happy to find a little bit of time. I just think it's absolutely essential both ways. It's important to receive the mentorship, and it's also important to give back and be a mentor.
For sure. I agree with that. I like your comment about being vulnerable, because that's really hard, especially it's hard in general to be vulnerable, but I think it's extra hard to kind of put on that lens of, I need to take a risk here and be vulnerable in a professional setting and ask for help or ask for guidance. But I also agree that it's so, so essential. And similar to other things we've talked about, I also think that there's so much opportunity on the other side of that challenge. Like, you have to take the risk, but it's definitely worth it. And and people do want to help. Everybody's been there. I feel like they want to help, right?
And sometimes it's long lasting. So I have people who have been my mentor for, decades. And then I've had people who have been there for me at extremely pivotal moments, um, who, you know, who advised me, who spoke up for me, uh, who were, advocates. And maybe it was for a very brief moment in time. Maybe it was just, as I was navigating one transition to the other. And those people, hey, just put it out there to everyone, thanks to anyone and everyone who's ever supported me, whether I've been aware of it or not been aware of it, because, I just wouldn't be anywhere near where I am today or where I have been in the past without the support of people. So it's really an honor to have people in your life who are willing to, stick their necks out for you.
I think you're right. I agree with that. I think that I'm guessing that the way you described that just now is a lot of the reason why your gratitude and appreciation for the people that have helped you is probably a lot of the reason why people have been willing to help you, because something you said indirectly just now was around the conversations that happen when you're not in the room. And that's an extra special thing, I think, someone looking out for you and
Yeah,
speaking on your behalf you don't even ever know about, but also they happen, right? And so that's
absolutely
cool.
true. That's absolutely true. And, and there's a difference between people who are mentoring you and people who are sponsoring you. The
Yeah.
person is that influential person who is sitting in the room in those influential conversations and will speak up on your behalf. And so it's really important to cultivate that.
Thanks for calling that out. I was actually thinking, I was like, what's a word? It's not it. I was thinking, that's not the word, a mentor, but what is I was thinking champion, but the sponsor is the right word. Thank you for
Right.
putting a label to it. You've had an amazing career. So many, so many experiences, significant impact, and are still having an amazing career. Well, thank you for taking the time to share it with us and be a little vulnerable on the call today and share about some of your past experiences and
My pleasure.
wins. And now, thank you. I've been thinking about this. Looking back, I feel like sometimes there are these things the experiences you have, maybe they seem big, maybe they seem small, but I guess the question is, looking back, as you reflect a little bit, are there any of these times in your life that maybe there are small experiences or decisions or opportunities that turned out to be way more than that? Do you have any of those in your mind? Like if you're thinking of it, I don't know. Yeah. Just curious if you have any of those that you think back of these.
I think that it's going to sound like I'm sort of talking out of both sides of my mouth, but sometimes I think it is really about the small moments. And while I didn't, where my parents weren't in a position because they had never, completed college, they weren't in the position to sit down and say, okay, here's the path that you need to take. We're going to help you. We're going to hold your hands. Um, so I didn't sort of have that big moment with them, but I had lots and lots of other moments where, I was really able to see through the modeling of their behavior, what their work ethic was, how, to this day, if they say that they're going to do something, they do it. Um, you know, and I kind of think of those as like these smaller moments that are just like day-to-day moments that it's not sitting down and having a heavy conversation. It's not written in a, birthday card. It's just the day-to-day, like slogging it out and seeing, their character. And I would say, and I know it's not exactly the question that you asked me, but that's what comes to my mind in terms of, sometimes I do think that it's about, and you can translate that to a team. What is that like working on a team? Is it like the big moments when you sit down and have like a big team discussion? You have like a corporate training and you're all going to sit down and you're going to talk about it? Or is it the day to day? Is it like, you know, how you show up for each other, or how you start a meeting, or how you kind of like make space and just listen to what somebody else has to say, or you create an environment where somebody can come to work and be like, you know what, I just had like a really crappy night, and, make space for people to talk about it. So I think that it's in those moments that you're sort of planting seeds for these opportunities. And that to me is how I interpret that question is it's really sometimes like just in the mundane of the day to day. How are you showing up? How are you creating spaces where people can be authentic and thrive and be supported? Reflecting on my career, that I've just had the opportunity. There's been those moments where somebody has turned to me and said, "No, meaning, what do you think?" Or handed me an assignment that maybe I didn't have any business doing, but they believed in me and it stretched me and it gave me the opportunity to shine. So I think that it's really in those types of moments where maybe it's unexpected, it's uncomfortable, but they present themselves and you seize them.
I think that is awesome. I mean, I think that's exceptionally true. Life, that isn't what I had in mind for, like you said, when I was thinking out the question, but it's like, it really resonates. I think other people resonate with other people as well, because so many of the important things, I think, looking back are just those day-to-day things, the small moments that, I don't know, maybe by themselves, they didn't, change any sort of outcome or directions, but a bunch of small interactions built up over time, those really do have an impact. I think relationships are like the most important thing. And that's, relationships are not those big moments necessarily either. There's some of them sprinkled in, but I think they're more like these day-to-day things. They're these small micro moments. So thanks for taking that angle. I love that approach. That's perfect.
Yeah. Thanks for the question.